The bride he ordered never spoke, until one night she screamed his name. She arrived on a Wednesday. He had expected her the previous Friday, which meant she was 5 days late, which meant the stew he had made the night before her original arrival date, and then again the night after, and then again 2 nights after that had been eaten alone each time, scraped into the pot to be reheated, a small repeated ceremony of waiting that his ranch hand Clem had watched with the particular silent sympathy of a man who understood loneliness without needing to discuss it. When the stage finally rolled into Bitterroot, Montana on that gray Wednesday afternoon, Jonas Cowboy was at the post office and not at the stage stop because he had stopped expecting her and had gone back to the ordinary business of his day, which was a thing you did when waiting became unsustainable. It was Clem who came to find him. "She's here," Clem said, appearing in the post office doorway with his hat in his hands. The woman, she's sitting on her trunk at the stage stop, and she hasn't moved, and Bill, the driver, says she's been sitting there the better part of an hour. Jonas looked up. "Sitting there," he said. "Just sitting," Clem said, not asking for anything, not talking to anybody, just sitting and waiting like she has all the time in the world and nowhere particular to be. Jonas put down his mail and went. She was exactly as described, a woman of perhaps 27 or 28, sitting on a battered trunk at the edge of the stage stop with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and an expression of such complete stillness that for a moment he thought she might be asleep sitting up. She was slight, with dark hair pulled back severely, and a traveling dress that had once been good quality and had been mended in 3 places he could see. She was not pretty in the way that announces itself. She was pretty in a way that takes a moment to find, and once found, is difficult to stop finding. She looked up when he approached. Her eyes were extraordinary, dark brown and very deep, and holding something in them that he could not immediately name, something that was not quite fear, and not quite grief, and not quite anything he had a clean word for. He said, "Miss Wren, I'm Jonas Calloway." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, just nodded. He waited. She did not speak. He said, "The wagon's just down the way. I'll take your trunk." She stood and moved aside to let him take it, and followed him to the wagon, and climbed up when he offered his hand, and sat beside him for the 11 miles to the ranch in a silence so complete and so absolute that by the time they arrived he had begun to wonder if there was something he had failed to understand about the advertisement he had placed and the woman he had received an answer to it. He had asked for a woman of good character, capable, willing to share a working life. He had not asked for a woman who spoke, but he had assumed, if you have ever tried to reach someone who had gone somewhere inside themselves that other people could not follow, this story is for you. And if you love slow, tender, deeply emotional Western romance stories about silence and the breaking of it, about women who stopped speaking because speaking had cost them everything, and the patient men who waited without demanding, you are in exactly the right place. Leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from today. And if you are new here, please subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let me tell you about Susanna Wren, and about Jonas Calloway, and about the night she screamed his name and what it meant and why it changed everything. Susanna Wren had not always been silent. She had been, in fact, a remarkably articulate child. Her mother had said so with a mixture of pride and exhaustion, because Susanna had begun talking early and had continued with enthusiasm and thoroughness, asking questions about everything, naming everything, filling the house on the edge of Cheyenne, Wyoming, with a particular sound of a child who found the world endlessly interesting and wanted to discuss all of it. Her father had called her his little sparrow, because she sang and because she never stopped. Her father's name was Owen Wren. He had been a schoolteacher and a gentle man, and he had loved his daughter with the uncomplicated completeness of a parent who sees in their child something that deserves to be protected. He had taught her to read before she was 5, and to do her figures before she was 6, and had told her frequently and sincerely that her voice was one of the best things in any room she entered. She had believed him, until the winter she was 19, when believing things stopped being something she had the equipment for. She had been engaged to a man named Porter Gill. Porter was 24 and the son of a successful Cheyenne merchant, and he was handsome and charming, in a particular way of men who have never been told no about anything important. Susanna had loved him the way a young woman loves when she has been protected and cherished all her life, and has no map for the kinds of love that are not safe. Porter Gill was not safe. He had a temper that he kept well hidden in public and less hidden in private. The first time it showed itself fully was 3 months before their wedding, when Susanna had said something at dinner at his family's home, some small opinion about something she could not even remember afterward, and he had taken her arm in the hallway after and put his face very close to hers and told her in a voice that was perfectly controlled and absolutely terrifying that she spoke too much and too freely, and that a wife of his would learn to govern herself accordingly. She had told her father. Her father had confronted Porter, and Porter had told Owen Wren that his daughter was confused, that what she had described was a misunderstanding, that Owen Wren was welcome to ask anyone who knew Porter's character, and they would tell him the same. Everyone who knew Porter's character told Owen Wren the same. Owen Wren believed his daughter. But Owen Wren was a schoolteacher with a schoolteacher's wage and no power of any kind over the Gill family. And when engagement was quietly dissolved, it was Susanna's name that suffered for it in Cheyenne, because Porter Gill was well-liked and his family was well-connected, and Susanna Wren was a schoolteacher's daughter who had broken an engagement and caused trouble where there had been no trouble before. She bore that. What she did not survive, not in a way that leave you whole, was the following spring. Her father had taken ill in March. By April, it was clear he was not going to recover, and Porter Gill, who had not forgotten or forgiven, had seen an opportunity in the form of a young woman about to be alone in the world, and had come to see her while her father was dying, sat in her parlor with his reasonable face and his reasonable voice, and told her that the situation between them had been a misunderstanding, that he had always cared for her, that she was going to need someone when her father was gone. She had told him to leave. He had not left. What happened in that parlor was not a misunderstanding. It was not something she had confused. It was something that Porter Gill told 2 people who asked and then told no one else. And Susanna told no one at all, because she had told the truth once before and watched it come back to her reshaped and diminished and weaponized. She had learned what speaking cost. Her father died in May. She had stood at his grave in the cold spring rain and felt the last safe thing in her life go into the ground with him. After that, she was quiet. Not immediately, not all at once. It happened the way some things happen, gradually and then completely. She spoke less in company. Then she spoke less in private. Then she found that the words had retreated so far inside her that reaching for them felt like reaching for something in deep water, possible in theory, but requiring more effort than she could consistently manage. She moved through Cheyenne for 2 years like a woman made of glass. She worked in a dry goods store because she could do the work without speaking much. She lived in a boarding house because the landlady, an efficient woman named Mrs. Parrish, did not require conversation. She ate and slept and worked and existed in the gray, practical way of someone who has decided that existing is all that can be required of them for now. She was 26 when her landlady's cousin visited from Denver and mentioned, with the offhand generosity of someone who thinks they're being helpful, a matchmaking service that placed women with Western ranchers. Susanna had looked at the window of her rented room for a long time that night. She had written the letter to Mrs. Harding's service with the care of someone constructing a document rather than communicating. She had described herself accurately and without embellishment, capable, hardworking, quiet, good with household management. She had not described herself as damaged or broken or sealed shut, though all of those were also accurate. She had received a response about Jonas Calloway of Bitterroot, Montana, and had written back with the same careful accuracy. And when the arrangements were made and the date was set, she had packed her trunk and begun the journey north and west toward a man she had never met. She had been delayed 5 days by a washed-out bridge in Wyoming that required a long diversion. She had spent those 5 days in a way station with a family of 4 and a traveling salesman, and had spoken fewer than 20 words to any of them, which they had attributed to unfriendliness, and she had attributed to the now familiar exhaustion of having anything to say. And then she was on a trunk in Bitterroot, Montana, and a man named Jonas Calloway had come to collect her. Jonas Calloway was 41 years old and had been a widower for 5 years. His wife Eleanor had died of fever that had moved through Bitterroot the winter of '78 and taken 6 people, including Eleanor, in 10 days, which was a kind of loss that happens too fast for the mind to properly account for it, and leaves a specific kind of damage. The damage of absence arriving before absence has been prepared for. He had managed. He had the ranch, 230 acres of good Montana grassland. And yet Clem, who had been with him for 12 years and was more companion than hired hand, and he had the work, which was endless enough that the days filled themselves adequately. But the house was wrong. He knew this without examining it too closely. It was functional and clean, and entirely without the quality that Eleanor had given it when she was alive, which was not something he could name precisely, something warm and inhabited and specific to a person being present who wanted to be there. He had placed the advertisement with practical intentions. He had told himself he was looking for capability and character, which was true as far as it went, and had not examined too closely what else he might be looking for. He had not been prepared for silence. The first week with Susanna Wren in the house was one of the stranger experiences of his adult life. She worked, and she worked well. The kitchen organized itself under her hands with a quiet efficiency that impressed him. The house took on a quality of order that had been missing. She appeared for meals and ate them, and cleaned up after, and was present for every practical requirement of the day. She did not speak, not a word, not even to say yes or no. She nodded, she shook her head, she pointed, occasionally, when that was more direct than any alternative. She communicated the basics with an economy that was in its own way almost elegant, but which left Jonas Calloway sitting across the supper table from a woman he had married, feeling like he was living alongside a very capable ghost. He tried. He asked questions. He told her things about the ranch, about the town, about the history of the land, about Clem and his opinions on various subjects, which were numerous and strongly held. He talked into the silence the way you talk into a dark room, not knowing if anyone can hear you, hoping the sound is reaching somewhere. She listened. He was certain she listened. He could see it in the quality of her attention, the way she was fully present even when she was completely still. But the words did not come back. He married her properly at the end of the first week, which was what the arrangement required, and the ceremony was the quietest he had ever witnessed, him saying his vows and her nodding once when the judge asked if she agreed, and the judge looking between them with an expression he had the decency not to speak aloud. That night Jonas sat on the porch for a long time in November cold. He thought about Eleanor, about the sound of her in the house, the particular voice of her, the way she said his name with two distinct syllables as if both of them mattered. He thought about the woman inside who had still not said his name, who had not said any name, who moved through his house like weather, present and affecting and entirely beyond conversation. He thought about what a man does when the thing he has arranged for himself turns out to be something entirely different from what he arranged. He decided he would be patient, not because he was a saint, because he looked at Susanna Wren's dark, extraordinary eyes and understood, with the instinct of someone who had known his own grief, that what was in them was not indifference. It was something that had been hurt very badly and had gone somewhere to protect itself. And he had enough experience of hurt things. The ranch was full of them. Horses that had been roughly handled, dogs that had been frightened, land that had been overworked, to know that patience and consistency and a complete absence of pressure were the only things that ever helped. He would not push. He would simply be present. And he would wait. He did not know how long it would take. He did not know if it would take at all. He only knew that the alternative, which was to demand or diminish or give up, was not something he could make himself do. So he talked into the silence every evening, and she listened, and November became December. The snow came to Bitterroot the first week of December with the commitment of Montana winters that do not begin tentatively. The ranch pulled inward the way it did every year, all firelight in close quarters and the particular intimacy of a small house in a large cold, and Jonas and Susanna moved around each other in it with the practiced care of people who have learned each other's physical rhythms without needing to speak. He learned things about her that words had not conveyed. She hummed very quietly when she was working alone and thought no one could hear. Small fragments of melodies he sometimes recognized and sometimes did not. She had strong opinions about how bread should be made and executed those opinions with a thoroughness that produced results that were objectively excellent. She read his books in the evenings, pulling them from the shelf with a decisiveness that told him she had specific preferences and knew them. And once he caught her smiling at something on a page, a real smile, brief and private and completely unguarded, and he looked away before she could notice him noticing, because it felt like something that belonged to her alone. He kept talking in the evenings. He had stopped asking questions that required answers. He just talked about the cattle and the weather and something Clem had said that morning and the way the light hit the North Ridge in the afternoons lately, and she sat across the fire and listened, and he told himself this was enough and mostly believed it. On the 14th of December, she brought him his coffee. This was not unusual. She brought him his coffee every morning. But on this morning, she sat down in front of him and then stood for a moment instead of turning away. And he looked up, and she was looking at him with those dark, extraordinary eyes, and there was something different in them, something that had been working toward the surface for a while and had come closer today. He waited. Her lips parted. She closed them. He did not move, did not encourage, did not lean forward with the kind of bright, expectant attention that would feel like pressure. She tried again. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out rough with disuse, barely more than a breath. 2 words that she had clearly assembled with tremendous effort and released with tremendous cost. And they were the first words he had heard from her in 6 weeks of living in the same house. He looked at his coffee cup. "You're welcome," he said, in exactly the tone he would use for anyone saying anything ordinary. She turned and went back to the stove. He drank his coffee. He did not make anything of it. He did not look at her differently or speak to her differently or alter the texture of the morning in any way that would mark those 2 words as extraordinary. He understood, without having to reason through it, that marking them would be the wrong thing, that the rightness of what had happened depended on it being received as normal. It had cost her everything to say those 2 words. The least he could do was make them feel safe. She said 2 or 3 words the next day, 4 or 5 the day after. Short, practical things, mostly pass the salt. The fence on the south side is loose. It looks like snow. He received everyone the same way, as ordinary and unremarkable, as if she had been saying things all along, and they were simply continuing conversation. Clem, who noticed everything and said almost nothing, caught Jonas alone in the barn one afternoon and said, "She's coming back from somewhere a long way off." Jonas said, "I know." Clem said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Jonas said, "I'm not doing much of anything." Clem looked at him with the expression of a man who knows better. "That's what I mean," he said, and went back to his work. By Christmas, Susanna was speaking in sentences. Short ones, still careful, still assembled with attention to each word that told him she was not yet at the stage where language felt easy, but sentences. She had opinions about the Christmas cooking that she expressed with a directness that made him realize how much presence there was in her, how much particular vivid personhood had been sitting quiet in that still body all along, waiting. On Christmas Eve they sat by the fire after supper, and she told him, unprompted and with the careful deliberateness of someone who has decided that something needs to be said, that she could not promise him she would explain everything right now, but that she knew she owed him an explanation, and that she intended to give him one when she was able. He looked at her across the fire. "You don't owe me anything," he said. She shook her head slightly. "I do. You've been." She paused, choosing. "You have been kind, in a very specific way, a way that understood something without being told." She looked at him. "Most people don't do that." He looked at the fire. "I lost someone," he said slowly. "Not the same way. But I know what it looks like when a person has gone somewhere inside themselves because it hurts less in there." He paused. "I wasn't going to drag you out. You'd come out when you were ready." She looked at him for a long moment. "Eleanor," she said, his wife's name. She had seen it on the marker in the small plot near the cottonwoods, and she had known it was his wife without being told. "Eleanor," he confirmed. "She was lucky," Susanna said quietly, "to be loved by someone patient." "She was the patient one," he said. "I learned it from watching her." Outside, the snow fell on Bitterroot in the deep silence of Christmas Eve, and inside the fire held its warmth against the cold, and they sat with the first real conversation between them moving in the air like something alive. The night everything changed came in February. Montana winters in February have a severity that other months do not match. The cold absolute and the darkness long, and the sense of the world being reduced to the small circle of warmth you have made for yourself. Jonas had been out late dealing with a section of collapsed fence that the weight of ice had finally brought down, and had come in cold to the bone and eaten the supper Susanna had kept warm and gone to bed and fallen into the deep, immediate sleep of physical exhaustion. He did not know what time it was when he heard it. It came from her room, which was across the narrow hall from his, a sound that assembled itself from nothing into something that stood him upright in his bed before he was fully awake, every nerve in him alert and reaching. She was dreaming. He understood that in the first second. But the dream had her in it completely, because the sounds coming from her room were the sound of someone in real terror, the specific uncontrolled sounds of body in genuine fear, and then, cutting through everything, clear as a bell and twice as startling in that house where silence had been the currency of every day for months. She screamed his name. Not a name. His name. Jonas. Twice. 3 times. With the raw, desperate quality of someone reaching for the one thing they believe can help them. He was across the hall and through her door in seconds. She was sitting upright in bed with her eyes open and unseeing and her hands fisted in the quilt, and she was still making sounds that were coming from somewhere beneath consciousness, somewhere the dream had hold of that waking had not yet reached. He did not touch her. He crouched at the bedside and said her name, steady and even, the way you speak to a frightened animal, not loud, not sharp, just present and real and findable. Susanna, you're at the ranch. You're safe. It's Jonas. You're safe. Over and over. The sound slowed. Her eyes focused. She found him in the dark of the room, and the fisted hands loosened slightly on the quilt. Then she put her face in her hands, and the crying came, the kind that has been held back for a very long time, and comes out with the totality of something that has been waiting for a safe enough moment to be real. He stayed crouched beside her bed and let her cry, because that was the right thing, and he knew it. He did not reach for her. He did not try to stop it or manage it. He just stayed present and close and completely without agenda. When it slowed, she took her hands from her face. In the dark, she looked at him, and he could see, even in the darkness, that she had made a decision about something. I need to tell you, she said. You don't have to tonight, he said. Tonight, she said, firmly, with a steadiness that told him the decision had been made, and she was not going to let herself unmake it. I have been quiet for 7 years. I am tired of the quiet. He straightened and pulled the chair from the small desk in the corner and sat in it beside the bed and said, all right. And she told him, Porter Gill, her father, the parlor, the things she had kept inside for 7 years, because speaking them had cost her everything once before, and she had not been able to find a reason to believe it would be different the second time. She told in the careful sentences of someone who is monitoring their own voice for the trembling, but not stopping when the trembling comes. She told all of it, completely, without softening the hard parts, and when she finished the room was very quiet except for the sound of the Montana wind against the window. Jonas sat for a moment. Then he said, Porter Gill. Yes, she said. He is in Cheyenne, as far as I know. Jonas looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked at her. What he did is something that should have had consequences, and did not, he said, and his voice was very even and very certain. And your father was a good man who deserved to be believed. And you were a young woman who was telling the truth. And the fact that the truth was not enough is a failure of every person who chose not to listen. He paused. None of it was your fault. I want you to hear me say that plainly. She looked at him. None of it, he said again. Not one piece of it. She pressed her lips together, breathed. You said my name, he said gently, in the dream. You called for me. She looked at her hands in the quilt. I know, she said quietly. That means something, he said. I'm not going to make it into more than it is tonight, but I want you to know that I heard it, and I'm here, and I'm not going to stop being here. She looked at him for a long time in the dark February room. Then she said, I have not felt safe in 7 years. I know, he said. I feel safe now, she said, simply as a report of fact. He looked at her, and the quality of what was in his face was something she had not seen directed at her in so long that she had forgotten it was something faces could do. Good, he said. That's where I want you. He brought her water and checked that the fire in the small bedroom stove was built up and said good night and went back to his room. He lay awake for a long time. Spring came to Bitter Root the way Montana springs come, reluctantly and then all at once. The snow pulled back from the lower pastures first and then the upper, and then one morning the cottonwoods along the creek had something green in them, and the light had changed its quality entirely, that specific shift from winter light to spring light that feels like the world exhaling. Susanna was changed and unchanged. The voice had come back, more fully with every week, and with it a person he was still in the process of discovering. someone wry and precise, and occasionally funny in a quiet, dry way that caught him off guard. She had strong opinions. She expressed them now in short, clear sentences that left no room for misunderstanding. She had begun to hum openly rather than only when she thought no one heard. He loved her. He had been aware of this as a developing fact since approximately the morning. She had said thank you with her rough, disused voice over his coffee cup. He had been setting it carefully aside, not acting on it, not allowing it forward because the timing was wrong and she was still finding her way back to herself, and he was not a man who confused his own feelings with someone else's readiness. She told him first, which he had not expected. They were at the creek in April, both of them doing the post-winter work of clearing the debris that had collected along the bank, and she straightened up and pushed the hair back from her face and looked at him across the small distance between them and said, "I think I love you. I have been trying to determine whether it is gratitude or something else, and I believe it is something else." He looked at her. "I'm not asking you to do anything about it right now," she said, with the precision of someone who had thought this through carefully. "I'm telling you because I've been quiet for 7 years, and I have decided that being quiet about the important things is over." He set down what he was carrying. "Susanna," he said. "You can take your time," she said. "I understand if you need to think about it. I am aware that I have not been straightforward to be married to, and that there are simpler women who would have—" "Susanna," he said again. She stopped. "I have been in love with you since December," he said. "I have simply been waiting for you to be ready to hear it." She looked at him across the creek bank in the April light. Then the laugh came, real and full and complete. The laugh of a woman who has been quiet for 7 years and has found something worth making noise for, and it moved across the water and into the cottonwoods and up into the enormous Montana sky. He watched her laugh and thought about a woman sitting on a trunk in bitter root, not saying a word, and thought about what was underneath that silence all along, all that life, all that person, all that laughter waiting to find its moment. He had waited. Here it was. She said his name again that evening, not in fear, not from a dream. Standing on the porch in the April dusk with the cottonwoods coming green along the creek and the ranch spread out in the long light, and everything ahead of them and nothing behind them that had not been survived. She said his name because it was his, and she had earned the right to it, and she was not going to be quiet about the things that mattered anymore. He answered. He would always answer. Some silences are not absences. They are the fullest possible presence of someone who has learned that speaking is dangerous and is waiting, with everything they have, for a reason to believe it is safe again. Give them the safety. Wait without pressure. Talk into the dark. And one morning, over a coffee cup, you will hear 2 words that cost more than you will ever know. And if you are patient enough and steady enough and present enough, eventually you will hear your own name spoken the way it was always meant to be spoken, with trust, with safety, with love. If this story found something in you today, please leave a comment below and tell me what moment stayed with you the most, and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. I read every single comment, and every one means everything. And if you are new here and you love slow, tender, deeply emotional Western romance stories about healing in silence and a love that is patient enough to wait for you, please subscribe and ring the bell. There's always a new story here waiting for you. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and with the quiet people around you. Sometimes the ones who say the least have the most worth hearing. All they need is someone willing to wait for it.